All right, welcome. Every great story has that one moment, right? The moment the hero steps out onto the stage for the very first time. Well, today we're diving into John chapter 2, and that's exactly what this is for Jesus. And let me tell you, this is no quiet start. It's a full-on public debut, like a 1-2 punch of miracles and confrontation that shows you who he is right from the jump.
So where does this epic story kick off? You might think a temple, maybe a palace, but no. It starts at probably the most relatable place you can imagine, a wedding. Yeah, right in the middle of a party in some small town with music and celebrating. That's where we get the very first glimpse of something truly extraordinary.
Okay, so verse 1. This just sets the stage for us. I want you to picture it, a little town called Cana, just buzzing with energy. You can almost hear the music playing, see people dancing, just feel that joy of a whole community celebrating a new marriage. And right there in the mix is Mary, Jesus' mom.
Then we hit verse 2, Jesus shows up. But there's no grand entrance, no trumpets or anything. He just arrives with his small crew of followers, his new disciples, and they just blend in. Imagine them finding a place in the crowd, ready to celebrate like anyone else. Super low-key. And then, bam, verse 3. We've got a problem. A big one. The music kind of dies down. You can see the host's face just drop in horror. See, back then, running out of wine at your wedding, that wasn't just oops, it was a huge, massive social embarrassment. So picture Mary, she sees the panic, and she calmly walks over to Jesus and just lays it out there with this look like she knows he can do something. She says, "They have no wine." Now, verse 4, this is where things get interesting. His response is, well, it's a little surprising. It sounds almost formal, "Woman, what does this have to do with me?" But hold on, this isn't him being disrespectful. It's way deeper than that. He's basically saying his actions are part of a much bigger plan, a divine schedule. He says, "My hour has not yet come." But check out Mary's reaction in verse 5. This is what's so incredible. Does she argue? Does she push back? Nope. She just turns to the servants with this look of complete, total confidence. I mean, picture it. She looks them right in the eye and gives this one simple, powerful instruction. Whatever he says to you, do it. That right there, that is absolute trust. Okay, so verse 6 kind of sets the stage with the props for what's about to happen. We're talking about 6 massive stone water pots. And listen, these aren't your average water jugs. These things are huge, like waist high, and they hold 20 or 30 gallons each. Think about that. They're these giant ceremonial jars just sitting there empty. The scale of this is just nuts. So in verse 7, Jesus gives the command. And it's so simple, it's almost boring, right? Fill the water pots with water. That's it. But imagine the servants. They remember what Mary told them, and they just spring into action. You can just hear the sound of them running back and forth, sloshing water, filling these gigantic jars, not just halfway, but literally to the very brim. All right, the tension is building here in verse 8. Jesus says, okay, now draw some out and take it to the master of the feast. Can you imagine being that servant? You nervously dip a ladle into what you know is just regular water. And then you have to take that long, quiet, nerve-wracking walk across the party to give it to the main guy, the head of the feast. And verse 9, this is the moment of truth. The master takes a sip. He's probably expecting, I don't know, water or maybe some leftover cheap stuff. But then his whole expression changes. That professional, serious look just melts away, and he looks completely stunned, totally delighted. He immediately waves over the bridegroom, holding up the cup like, you gotta try this. And here it is, the punchline in verse 10. The master grabs the bridegroom, and he's just raving, hey, everyone serves the good stuff first, but you saved the best for last. Imagine the poor bridegroom just standing there totally confused while the whole party just explodes back to life, even more joyful than before. So, let's get to the real heart of it in verse 11. Look, this wasn't just about saving a party from being a dud. This was the beginning of signs. It was a reveal of his glory. It showed everyone that Jesus doesn't just patch up problems. He brings something overwhelmingly better. And the visual here? It's his disciples, just off to the side, watching this whole thing go down. Picture them, just looking at each other, totally speechless. That's the moment their belief goes to a whole new level. They're realizing their teacher is so much more than they ever thought. All right, so the story takes a sharp turn in verse 12. After this amazing display of creative power at a small-town wedding, Jesus and his crew head to Capernaum for a bit, and then they're off to the biggest stage there is, Jerusalem, during Passover. So we're going from a quiet celebration to a massive public confrontation.
So verse 13 sets that new scene. Just imagine a city completely packed. Jerusalem is overflowing with pilgrims from all over the world. The air is thick with excitement, with devotion, and just the noise of a massive crowd gathering at the center of their faith. But in verse 14, when Jesus walks into the temple courts, he doesn't find a place of peaceful prayer. He finds total chaos. Picture a loud, smelly marketplace that's been set up right where people are supposed to be worshiping. You've got animals being sold for sacrifice, probably at rip-off prices, and money changers haggling and taking advantage of the pilgrims. Verse 15 is just pure, explosive action. Jesus doesn't just yell at them. No, he bends down, grabs some loose cords lying around, and braids a whip. And then imagine the sharp crack of that whip as he drives the merchants and all their animals out. Tables go flying, and you just see the shower of coins scattering all over the stone floor. This is a deliberate, powerful, physical cleansing of the temple. And then his voice just cuts through all that chaos in verse 16. It's a roar of absolute authority. Picture his face, not wild, out-of-control rage, but this focused, righteous anger as he declares, "Do not make my Father's house a house of merchandise." He's taking back this sacred space. And for the disciples watching this, verse 17 is a huge aha moment. As they see this intense scene unfold, a line from the Psalms just flashes into their minds. "Zeal for your house has eaten me up." And that ancient prophecy suddenly makes perfect, almost terrifying sense. This isn't just anger. This is a holy passion. Well, as you can imagine, this causes a massive stir. In verse 18, the temple authorities show up. Picture them, in all their official robes, standing in his way. And their question is a direct challenge. It's a demand. "Oh yeah? What sign can you show us that gives you the right to do any of this?" Jesus' answer in verse 19 is one of the most confusing and powerful things he ever says. He looks at them, standing there in the shadow of this incredible building, and he just says, "Destroy this temple, and in 3 days I will raise it up." Can you just imagine the stunned, baffled silence that must have followed that statement? So verses 20 and 21 show us this huge misunderstanding. The leaders just look around at the massive stone temple and they just scoff. They're like, "Are you kidding? This place took 46 years to build." But of course, Jesus wasn't talking about stone and gold. He was talking about a completely different temple, the temple of his own body. Verse 22 fast forwards into the future. It's only after he has risen from the dead that his disciples finally get it. It's like a light bulb goes on. They remember what he said in the temple that day, and all of a sudden, this totally confusing prophecy becomes crystal clear proof of who he is, and their belief becomes unshakable. So in verses 23 and 24, you can imagine the buzz. Crowds are starting to follow him, right? They see the miracles, they hear the talk, and a lot of them start to believe. But, and this is a huge but, Jesus doesn't really lean into it. He kind of keeps them at arm's length. He isn't swept up in his own popularity contest because he sees something they don't. And that leads us to the final, really profound thought in verse 25. So why did he hold back? Well, because he didn't need anyone to tell him what people were like. The verse says he knew what was in each person. Wow. He could see right past the cheering and the excitement, straight into the heart. He saw if their belief was real or just temporary hype. And that really leaves us with a huge question, doesn't it? What's the real difference between just being a fan of the miracles and actually truly believing in the one who performs them?